Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to our online class. Again, this is Sir Mark, and I will be your instructor in MLS 304, which is clinical microscopy. And our first topic for this semester will be safety and quality assessment. As per quality assessment, I'm going to leave it to you to ask you to read it on your respective books, no? Because that is self-explanatory, and we're going to discuss it further in our clinical chemistry class. Okay, so for the purpose of this discussion, I'm going to discuss and I'm going to give an emphasis in our safety in clinical laboratory. Okay, so for our learning objectives, no, you are expected to explain the purpose of standard precautions and describe its guidelines. So why is it important in the clinical laboratory setting, and describe acceptable methods for handling and disposing biologic waste product, because in clinical microscopy section you will be exposed into different body fluids, which is considered as a body body fluids, which is considered as a potential carrier of infectious agents. All right, the question is, why is it important, or why is safety important in the clinical laboratory? Well, I'm sure that you are all aware of what is happening nowadays in the country, not only in the Philippines but worldwide, wherein we are experiencing a pandemic, no? COVID-19 pandemic caused by SARS-CoV or SARS coronavirus 2. Now, why is it important that we will follow safety in the clinical laboratory setting? Because that is the best thing that we can make, so that we can eliminate the possibility of retransmission of the uh, infectious agents. No, safety will always be an important part of the clinical laboratory setting. That's why most of your classes in your third year, ngayong third year, will deal all about safety, and that is the first part that we have to know. Most especially that you will work in the laboratory sometime in 2 years from now. Okay, remember guys that safety is important aspect of the clinical laboratory, because that will help us, no, to eliminate the possibility of having or acquiring the infection, because we have what we call the nosocomial infections, okay, which is the hospital acquired infection, and if we will not follow the standard precautions or safety in the clinical laboratory setting, then there's a high probability or possibility that you will get an infection. Okay? So, I want you to ponder, and I want you to realize why safety is important aside from what I've mentioned. Now, I am sure and I am aware that you will be able to understand, and you will be able to think why is safety important in the clinical laboratory setting. Okay? So I have here the list of safety hazards or types of safety hazards. No? And most of them is the biologic hazards. Since we are working in the laboratory, no, most of them will be classified as the biologic hazards. And when we said biologic hazards, the most common source or the main source of biologic hazards is the infectious agents. Now, when we said that is an infectious agent, it deals with your microorganisms such as bacteria, fungi, virus, and parasites. Remember that those are our infectious agents. But remember, of all infectious agents, it is fungi, which is, no, I'm sorry, it is virus, which is considered somehow different from the other three, because the complexity of the structure of viruses, which made it too hard for the virologists and for the manufacturers of drugs, no, to formulate drug that will help us, no, to uh, stop, or that will help us to make our immune system strong. No, in your mycology and virology class, you will discuss that the structure of your virus, which is called viron, is different no, different from the other three infectious agents. And most of them, no, I'm sorry, uh, your infectious agent from your infectious agent, the most common, okay, the most common infectious agent is your bacterial. That's why bacterial infections is one of the most leading biologic hazards that can be acquired in the laboratory. Now, I want you to take note, guys, that we have what we call, no, we have what we call nosocomial infection. Okay, we have what we call the nosocomial infection. Wait, I'm going to write it. Nosocomial. Okay, we have here the nosocomial infection, which is the hospital-acquired infection. Now, remember, one of the best or one of the leading cause of nosocomial infection is your Streptococcus pneumoniae. Okay, Streptococcus pneumoniae. Please take note of this. Okay, please take note of this. Streptococcus pneumoniae is one of the leading cause of nosocomial infections. No, most especially from hospital workers. Okay. Now, aside from that, what are the other hazards that can be found or that can be seen in the laboratory? Now we have here the sharps. So remember that you are not only working in the clinical laboratory, clinical chemistry laboratory, but you will be also exposed into phlebotomy area wherein you will have your lancet, you will have your needle. Now, you remember that aside from biologic hazards, we have sharps as one cause of hazards or one type of hazard rather in the clinical laboratory. Okay? Well, even though that you are working in the clinical laboratory, in clinical microscopy laboratory, no, take note that you will also be exposed in sharps because you will be dealing with tubes. Broken tubes is considered as a sharp hazard. The slides, no, can also be a sharp hazard. Then, aside from sharps, you have here the chemical hazards, but not that too much, no, not that the exposure of a clinical laboratory scientist working in clinical microscopy, pagdating po sa pag-uusap natin ng chemical hazards ay hindi naman siya ganun ka-hazard or hindi ganun kalaki ang exposure or kataas ang exposure because there are very or rare instances that you will use chemicals in clinical microscopy because our chemical examination of urine nowadays uses reagent strip. Hindi na kagaya before that the medical technologists will perform all chemical tests manually using different chemicals. So, less exposure na po tayo ngayon sa chemicals. Usually, gagamitin mo na lang ang chemical sa clinical microscopy kapag ikaw ay mag-perform ng confirmatory test for proteins such as the sulfosalicylic acid, SSA, for the determination of your Benz-Jones protein. Okay? Next is radioactive, not that too that significant in the clinical laboratory. No, electrical. Well, since we are in the advent of technology and automation, most of the equipment in the clinical laboratory settings requires electrical connection. So just make sure that you will be safe when you are handling with this kind of scenario. No, remember the possible injury if you're exposed in electrical hazard are burns or shock. Well, of course, fire and explosive or fire hazards will also be possible in the clinical laboratory setting, and physical hazards such as wet floor, heavy boxes, or patients, no, even the patient is considered as a physical hazard. So halimbawa, you are in the elevator, kapag nakabalik na po tayo sa ating normal situation, no, kapag may mga nakita ka mga bata or mga first year or kung sino man o mga tao nakaharang sa iyo sa elevator, they are considered as a physical hazards. Okay? So those are the types of hazards that can be seen in the clinical laboratory. Now, let's discuss biologic hazards. It is important for us to know that biologic hazards is the one or the most leading cause or the leading hazard in the clinical laboratory. Ngayon, kapag pinag-uusapan natin ay ang biologic hazard, it is important for you to remember that chain, no? The chain of infection, no? Mahalaga na alam mo yung tinatawag nating chain of infection. Okay? Sa chain of infection, meron tayong tinatawag na infectious agent, and that will be your bacteria, fungi, virus, and parasites. No? Reservoir. Ang reservoir, pwedeng ikaw, pwedeng tao, no? Pwedeng bagay na nandun sa hospital or soon man. Fomites is considered a reservoir. Pag po sinabi natin fomites, ito yung mga gamit sa hospital na nagkameron ng contamination nagkameron ng contamination from infected individual. Portal of exit, it can be through mucus, through saliva, no? Mode of transmission, direct exposure, inhalation, no? Vehicle, droplet, port of entry, inhalation, yung mga ganung bagay. And then, susceptible host. Sino ba yung susceptible host dito? Remember that the susceptible host in the chain of infection will be you. Ikaw yon, na walang iba kundi ikaw ang susceptible host. So, remember, sa biologic hazard, mahalagang tandaan mo dito yung chain of infection. And remember, the best way, ang sabi natin, the best way to break the chain of infection is what? The best way to break, no? The best way to break the chain of infection is through washing of hands. Remember, to break the chain of infection, we need to wash our hands. No? Lalong-lalo na ngayon that we are in the midst of pandemic, washing of hands is recommended. And take note that the ideal time or the ideal length of washing of hands, hindi yung happy birthday, hindi yung leron-leron sinta. Because if you will sing happy birthday na ang bilis-bilis ng bibig mo, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, wala pa siguro 10 seconds, tapos na ang iyong hand washing. So, remember that the ideal time for hand washing is 15 to 20 seconds. Okay? 15 to 20 seconds po ang ating ideal hand washing. Hindi yung magbuhukas ka ng kamay, babasain mo lang, hindi po yun magiging makatotohanan. No? Kumbaga, ang ginawa mo, binasa mo lang ang iyong kamay. Okay? Now, in terms of modes of transmissions, we have direct contact, airborne, droplet, vehicle, or vector. Well, of course, I am sure that all of you are aware of what is vector, no? From an animal or insect bite. Alam na alam natin yan because lagi natin siyang pinag-uusapan before in our parasitology class. Now, pag sinabi naman natin vehicle, what is the difference between vector and vehicle? Both of them can transmit infection. No? Pero ang mahalaga mong tandaan dito, pag sinabi nating vector, sila yung mga animal. Sila yung mga insect. And sometimes, no, there are times, no, that human can also be considered as vector. Now, you are vectoring the infection. Now, kapag naman vehicle, that is a ingestion of contaminated substances from an contaminated food or contaminated object. No? Droplet, no, host inhales from the reservoir. Again, pag sinabi nating reservoir, ikaw yan, pwedeng ikaw. No? Airborne inhalation of dried aerosol particle and direct contact, no, unprotected touches the patient, specimen, or contaminated object. Kaya no, before siguro naiinis kayo or naiiyamot kayo if I'm always requiring you to wear your personal protective equipment, hindi lang nakabotones ang iyong lab gown, nasiro ka na agad, no? Yung iyong mask nakalagay lang dito sa ilalim because that is the purpose, no? That is the ultimate purpose why I am requiring you and why I am teaching you the importance of personal protective equipment. Because tingnan nyo ang nangyayari nowadays, no? Sa ating mundo, hindi lang sa Pilipinas, buong mundo nakaka-experience, no, ng COVID-19. And one of the best way to break it, to stop it, is wearing the personal protective equipment. But I want you to remember, guys, no, tandaan nyo that in the level of safety, no, doon sa level of safety na pinag-uusapan natin, yung pinaka effective, okay, yung most effective na way is the engineering controls. Ano ba spelling ng engineering? Wait, let me delete this. Okay? Yung most effective way to stop the spread of infection is yung mga engineering controls natin. Lagay na lang natin NGR controls. Okay, the facilities. Kaya yung sabi, yung mga social distancing na yan, talagang importante yan. At kung alam nyo po, yung pinaka-least effective sa lahat, okay, yung pinaka-least effective, actually, that is the PPE. Akala mo, yung PPE, yung pinaka-effective sa lahat. No, actually, siya yung pinaka, no? Siya yung pinaka least effective. Ibig sabihin, hindi pala din siya ang pinaka nakakatulong. Ang pinaka nakakatulong is yung mga engineering controls na importante para sa clinical laboratory. And later, we're going to discuss what are those engineering controls that will help us, no, to understand why is it important, no, ang mga engineering controls na yan. Okay? So going back, what is this? Well, I hope and I assume that you have an idea of what is this symbols all about. Okay? That is the biohazard symbol or the biologic hazard symbol. No? Nung board exam, mayroong tanong. At ito yung tanong. How to describe the symbol? Ang tanong ay, how to describe the biohazard symbol? Akala nyo siguro, ang tanong sa word exam is yung picture. At sasabihin sa'yo, A, biohazard, B, sharps, D, blah, 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 blah. No, it is not like that. In the board exam, they will ask you on how are you going to define, on how are you going to describe the symbol. And having said that that is the question, then, how are you going to describe the symbol? That is basically a three dark bordered circles joined together. Please take note. Three dark bordered circles joined together. If you love math and if you still remember your grade 1 lesson in mathematics, no, our grade 1 lesson in mathematics, the Venn diagram. So para siyang Venn diagram, para siyang yung sa Olympics, no, yung simbolo ng Olympics. Pero that is the biologic hazard symbol. And how are we going to define that? How are we going to describe that? Three dark bordered circles joined together. Please, I want you to take note of this. I want you to have a screenshot of this one. Okay? Now we have what we call the universal precautions. At ano pong ibig sabihin ng universal precautions? Kapag sinabi natin universal precaution, it is a statement that says all patients are possible carriers of blood-borne pathogens. Kaya kahit po tayo sa school, kapag tayo ay nagla-laboratory, nire-require pa rin namin kayo na mag-gloves, na magsuot ng lab gown, na magsuot ng mask, na magsuot ng hair cap. No? Bakit? Because we have what we call the universal precautions. Eh sir, kaklase naman namin sila. Diba? Iko-consider pa ba natin sila as infectious? Iko-consider pa ba natin sila as a carrier of blood-borne pathogens? Yes. All patient. Eh sir, ikaklase ko naman siya. Hindi naman siya patient. Even though you are going to extract blood from that classmate, from your classmate. You're going to get sample from your classmate kahit pa sinasabi mo na siya ay kaklase mo lang siya, kakilala mo siya, even your parent will be considered as a potential carrier of bloodborne pathogens. The reason why I am discouraging you, okay, I am discouraging you to extract blood from anyone without the supervision of a registered medical technologist or of your clinical instructors. No, sa video, sa Facebook, ang dami nating nakikita na puro naman mali ang mga ginagawa at nakakalungkot isipin na parang pinaglalaroan na lang nila ang pagkuha ng dugo. And take note, doon sa blood na na-spill from the patient na akala mo healthy, ay pwedeng siya ay carrier ng bloodborne pathogen, syphilis, HIV, hepatitis B, na hindi mo naman alam. Kapag ganun ang nangyari, then there will be a direct exposure doon sa mismong virus, doon sa mismong infectious agent. So regardless, kaklase man yan, magulang man yan, lover mo man yan, or kung sino man yan, kapag ikaw ay nagtatrabaho na sa hospital, you will consider them as a potential carrier of bloodborne pathogens. Okay? Next, aside from universal precaution, ang sinasabi ng universal precaution, tandaan, ang sinasabi ng universal precaution, lahat ng tao ay considered na mayroong bloodborne pathogen, na mayroong sakit sa dugo, na nakakahawa, na pwede mong makuha. Aside from that, we have what we call the personal protective equipment that will somehow, okay, I want to make it clear, that will somehow help us to stop, to prevent the possibility of having a disease. But the problem is, are you aware on how are you going to wear your personal protective equipment? Because nakakatuwa kayong isipin minsan, no, na natapos na yung laboratory experiment. Okay? Natapos na yung laboratory experiment, syempre mag-aalis ka na dyan ng mga PPE mo. That is the time, no, that is the most awaited time of our laboratory class. That I, your teacher, will instruct you that you can now remove your personal protective equipment, and that is the time that you will say yes. That is the time na sabi mo, yes, makakapagtanggal na ako ng mga PPE na ito na napakainit sa loob ng katawan ko. But the question is, alam mo ba kung paano siya hubarin? Alam mo ba kung paano siya isuot? I've observed a lot, no? So many times. And I am been in teaching for almost 4 years. At nakakakita lang ako, siguro out of 10 students, I can say that there are only 4 students who uh, remove, who wear their personal protective equipment in a appropriate way. Nakakalungkot isipin na madami sa inyo ang hindi alam, or should I say, alam naman kasi tinuro pero hindi pinapractice ang proper way of removing and wearing personal protective equipment. So how are we going to do that? When we said donning, that is the way of wearing, no, your personal protective equipment. Okay? So the first thing that you need to do before wearing your personal protective equipment is to wash your hands. After that, wear your gown, your mask, your goggles, and then your hair cap or your hairnet. And lastly is your gloves. Lagi mong ihuhuli yung pagsusuot ng gloves. At yung doffing naman, kabaliktaran ng donning. No? Siyempre, ang una mong aalisin is yung gloves. Alangan naman nag-aalis ka ng lab gown, naka gloves ka pa to. Oh, hindi naman to gloves. Na sinusuot ko lang to, itong black na to, baka nakikita nyo and nababother kayo. Ano kaya yung black sa kamay na Sir Mark? That is actually a glove that will help me para makapagsulat ako ng husay sa aking virtual whiteboard. Okay? So, hubarin mo. Oh, tamang-tama. I can use this for my demonstration. Yung iba, kapag huhubad, ganun. Ano yung hinawakan mo? If you are working in the clinical laboratory, pwedeng dugo, pwedeng ihe, pwedeng tae. Ay sus ko, hinawakan mo ng ganan. Hindi po yun yung tama. No? Yung tama, hawakan mo siya, hawakan mo yung pinakailalim ng iyong gloves, no? Iangat mo siya hanggang sa ma-remove mo siya. And then using your hand na wala ng gloves, ipasok mo dun sa loob and then remove it. Ganun dapat. Kasi yung iba sa inyo, alam ko na alam naman at itinuro naman sa inyo, but you are not performing it right. So please, no, tandaan natin on how are you going to remove your personal protective equipment. So bago mo isuot, ang mga PPE na yan, maghugas ka ng kamay. And after you remove all your PPE, then you wash your hands. Lalong-lalo na yung pagre-remove ng mask. Yung pagre-remove ng mask, wag mong hahawakan yung surface na nasa unahan. Paano mo siya alisin? Using the airlock. No, yun ang gamitin mo para maalis mo ang iyong mask. And then again, wash your hands. Okay. If universal precautions deals with all patient is a possible carrier of blood-borne pathogens, meron po tayong tinatawag na body isolation, body substance isolation or the BSI. Again, sa universal precaution daw, lahat ng blood or lahat ng person is considered a carrier of blood-borne pathogens. Ngayon, kapag sinabi naman nating body substance isolation, all body fluids and moist body substance to be potentially infectious. Ibig sabihin, ihe, synovial, CSF, serous fluids, which are your peritoneal, pericardial, ay lahat po yan ay considered as potentially infectious. May mga infectious agent din po na possible na nandyan. So sa universal precaution, dugo ang pinag-uusapan niya. Sa body substance isolation, ang tinutukoy naman niya is our body fluids. Okay. Until such time in the year 1996, si CDC, Center for Disease Control, at saka si Healthcare Infection Control Practices Advisory Committees or HICPAC, noong year 1996, they combined the universal precaution and the body substance isolation. At ano po yung tawag doon? That is the standard precautions. So si UP, universal precaution, lahat ng blood considered as potential carriers of blood-borne pathogens. Tapos, si body substance isolation, siya naman yung lahat ng body fluids ay considered as carrier of infectious agents. Tapos nung year 1996, si UP at si BSI pinagsama. No? At ano yung tawag na doon? That is our standard precautions. So ano yung nandun sa standard precautions na yan? Hand hygiene, wearing of gloves, mouth, nose, eye protection, gown, patient care equipment, environmental control, linen, occupational health and blood-borne pathogens, patient placement, respiratory, hygiene, cough, etiquette. O alam na natin, ang hand hygiene. Ang gloves daw dapat waterproof. hindi nababasa yung kamay, hindi tela lang. At dapat ang gloves provided ng hospital. Dapat lahat ng nagwo-work mayroong mouth, nose, and eye protection. Ibig sabihin, dati pa pala yung mga PPE na yan, ay bakit ngayon na lang nauso? Bakit ngayon na lang po, sir, ulit, nagkameron ng lahat ng nagtatrabaho sa hospital, nagsusuot ng respirator, nagsusuot ng N95, nagsusuot ng mask, ng gloves, ng gown. Before naman, nakamask lang sila. Minsan nga, wala pa. No? In the year 1996 pa lang, 1996 pa lang, ibig sabihin, 18 years na siyang meron. Not, hindi lang 18 years. 1996, 24 years. No? 24 years na nag-e-exist ang standard precaution na nire-require ang lahat ng medical health practitioner na mag-wear ng mouth, nose, and eye protection. Pero ngayon na lang ulit kasi merong virus, merong pandemic. But if we as medical practitioners noon pa lang ginagawa na natin to, then we will have the lesser chances na magkameron ng infection, na magkameron ng transmission. No, gown. Actually, yung gown, dapat waterproof. And it is recommended that the gown, dapat nasa likod yung botones, yung pantali. Okay? Patient care equipment. Alam nyo ba, na sa totoong buhay, yung gloves dapat 1:1. Sa isang pasyente, isang beses. Palit. Hindi. Lalong-lalo na sa government hospital. Yung gloves mo, maitim na, yun pa din ang gagamitin mo sa susunod na pasyente. Kaya ano yung nangyayari? Yung mayroon doon sa pasyente mong nauna, ikaw ang nag-vector, ikaw ang nagdala. Environmental control. Negative pressure ba dapat? Positive pressure ba? Nag-airflow ba? Meron ba dapat appropriate ventilation? Linen. No? Each hospital dapat yung mga gamit sa hospital, yung mga ginamit ng mga pasyente, ino-autoclave agad. Okay? Occupational health and bloodborne pathogens. Lahat ng empleyado dapat binibigyan ng hospital ng free vaccine, ng free medical assistance or medical check-up. Hindi yung ibabawas mo pa sa sweldo ng iyong empleyado, ang liit-liit na nga ng sweldo. No? Patient placement. Saan mo ilalagay yung mga pasyente mo na nag-carry ng infectious agent? O may TB na siya. No? Yung pasyente mo, the patient is experiencing merong tuberculosis. Doon mo ba siya ilalagay sa ward na kung saan maraming pasyente na dikit-dikit doon? Dapat hindi. Each hospital dapat mayroong isolation ward or isolation room for those cases. And respiratory and cough etiquette. O paano ko matching? Paano ko mag-cough? Hatching. No, itututo ka pa, haharap ka pa sa kaklase mo para merong shower of blessings. Okay? So, engineering controls, ito yung importante sa sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina. Providing sharp disposal containers and needle with safety devices. Requiring discarding of needles with safety device activated and the holder attached. Labeling all biohazardous material and containers. Okay? So, tandaan yung engineering controls. Providing, requiring, labeling. At ikaw, bilang isang medtech, bilang isang medical laboratory science student, it is important, it is a must that you know how are you going to dispose all those equipment na ginamit mo during your shift. Hindi yung glass slide na nandun na yung ihi ng pasyente, natuyo na yung ihi ng pasyente, iniwanan mo doon sa iyong microscope. Okay? My dearest student, the reason why I am giving you this lecture is for you to realize yung mga mali nyong ginagawa noong mga nasa laboratory pa kayo. You're going to leave your slides in the microscope. Ako hindi ko alam kung ano yung ginawa nyo doon. It is our moral responsibility, our moral duties to keep our environment, our working place suitable for everyone. The reason why, what is one of the rules that we are implementing in the laboratory? Disinfect before you work and disinfect after you work. Disinfecting before you work, assuming that the person who worked prior to you failed to do that, fails to do that. And disinfecting your working area after, no, after mong magawa is your moral obligation para makatulong doon sa susunod na maggagawa doon. That is part of the engineering controls. Kaya naman pala sa sir, inis na inis ka kapag hindi namin nililinis ang pinagamitan namin. Yes. Okay? Please take note of that. Work practice controls. Number 1, requiring our employees to practice standard precautions. O tandaan, si standard precautions, pinagsamang UP at BSI. Documentation and training on annual basis. Dapat meron lagi. Kaya dito sa school pa ulit-ulit tayo. Ito na naman ang tinuturo niya. Lagi na lang pag first day, ito ang tinuturo. Para pag nagtrabaho ka, alam mo, hindi mo makakalimutan na mahalaga ang safety. Okay? Next, prohibiting eating, drinking, smoking, and applying cosmetics in the work area. Kaya pala sir, galit na galit po tayo kapag mayroon pong basura, mayroon pong kalat, mayroon pong pinagkainan, pinag-inuman, pinagbalatan ng mga kung ano namang pagkain sa laboratory. Because you are working in the laboratory, you are in the laboratory to work sa iyong mga experiment, not to do your leisure, not to do eating, not to do drinking. Okay? And number 3, establishing a daily work surface disinfection control protocol. No? Ano yung ginagamit nating pan-disinfect? Lysol, 1:10. Kung walang Lysol ang hospital, sodium hypochlorite, bleach, hindi Sunrox. Kasi ang Sunrox, brand. Okay? Sodium hypochlorite, 1:10 ang dilution. 1 part sodium hypochlorite, 9 parts water. Okay? Yan, personal protective equipment. Lahat ng yan na nakikita nyo ngayon, dapat noon pa lang ginagamit na. Hindi lang ngayon. Okay, medical, vaccine and check-up. Lahat daw ng hospital, it is a must, according to the standard precautions, that all hospitals, including laboratory, freestanding laboratory, must provide a free vaccination program against hepatitis B to all of its employee free of charge. I want you to take note of this, and I want you to remember of this one. Check up. An hospital or an institution must provide an annual check-up for all employees free of charge. Next, providing medical check-up sa lahat ng mga empleyado na nagkameron ng accidental injury or was exposed to blood-borne pathogens. Documentation. Lahat ng training dapat officially documented. Kapag may training, huwag kang magmarunong, umattend ka. Documenting evaluation and implementation of safer needle devices. Involving employees in the selection and evaluation of new devices and maintaining the list of employees. And maintaining a sharp injury log, including the type, the brand of safety device, location, and the description of incident. Confidential employee follow-up. So lahat ng yan nakapaloob sa documentation. Ano po yung gagawin kapag yung ikaw, halimbawa, unfortunately, na-expose or nagkaroon ng needle injury? Ang una mong gagawin, wag mong story, wag kang iiyak, wag kang maghormentado sa iyong chief medic. The first thing that you need to do is to report it to your supervisor. Next in line is to evaluate the accident. Okay? Dadalhin ka sa infection control to perform necessary tests for you. You, as the medical technologist, and the patient will be tested. No? Itetest kayo against bloodborne pathogens. Definitely, ikaw, wala ka pang makukuha, wala ka mag-positive. Hindi ka magre-reactive. Siyempre, ka-expose mo pa lang. May window period tayong tinatawag. No? Bakit po sir kailangan na agad din akong i-test? Para malaman natin. That will be our baseline. Kasi prior to the exposure, you might be a carrier also na hindi mo alam. Okay? The reason why it is important that both of you, will be tested for the possibility of having a bloodborne pathogen. Next is give HIV prophylaxis for within 24 hours. Take note, if you're going to compare, I'm going to share my whiteboard. No? If we are going to compare HIV at ang hepatitis B, no? Gusto ko tandaan nyo, kasi ako tanda ko na, tandaan nyo na kapag ang pinag-uusapan natin dito is si HIV versus hepatitis B virus, no? Mas mataas ang chances na magkameron ka ng hepatitis B virus from needle injury kaysa sa HIV. Okay? Mas mataas ang chance na magkameron ka ng hepatitis B virus kaysa sa HIV kung ikaw ay nagkameron ng needle injury. Bakit? Kasi tandaan mo, yung hepatitis B virus, hindi ko alam kung nabanggit ko na ba ito sa inyo or what, pero ulitin ko na lang ulit. Tandaan mo, yung hepatitis B virus can survive into room temperature for 7 days. At yung HIV, no, within a minute na wala siyang mucus, without mucus, yung HIV virus mo, I'm sorry, it's wrong to say HIV virus. Yung HIV ay nasisira na agad. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, between hepatitis B and HIV, mas nakakatakot, no? Na or mas malaki yung chance na magkaroon ka ng hepatitis B, ano ba yan, Mark? Ng hepatitis B kapag ikaw ay na-expose sa bloodborne or sa pasyente, nagkaroon ka ng needle injury. So those are the things na dapat mong tandaan kapag ikaw ay nagkaroon ng needle injury. Okay, next is hand hygiene. Kailan ka ba dapat maghugas ng kamay? Now, if you still remember our discussion in Principles of Touching, wherein there is a certain individual who is fan of washing his hands for 20 minutes and taking a bath after uh, urinating. No? Nakakameron siya ng excessive compulsive reaction. Kailan ba dapat maghugas ng kamay? Actually guys, remember, no, kagaya na sinabi natin kanina, hand hygiene is the best way to break the chain of infection. Okay? And how are we going to wash our hands? Alam niyo na yan. It's not for me to discuss it anymore because I am sure that you are all aware on how to do hand washing. I will let you to read it in the book and realize ganito ba ang ginagawa ko. Okay? For the purpose of this discussion, for the purpose of this lecture, pag-usapan natin, ano ba yung mga bagay at kailan ka ba dapat maghugas ng kamay? No? It is recommended to wash your hands if your hands is visibly soiled with dirt. Sir, ano po? Visibly soiled with dirt. Ibig sabihin, yung kamay mo, kitang-kita na madumi. No? Wash your hands. Okay. Wash your hands if visibly soiled. Visibly soiled. Ibig sabihin, sobrang dumi ng iyong kamay. Kitang-kita na madumi ang iyong kamay. Wash your hands before and after eating. Wash your hands after urinating. Okay? Wash your hands before and after wearing personal protective equipment. How about if your hands is not visibly soiled with dirt? Ano yung pwede mong gawin? Pwede ka pong mag-apply ng alcohol-based sanitizer. Okay? Alcohol-based sanitizer. However, anong sabi natin dito? Babalik ko lang. Ang sabi natin dito, yung pong hands daw, yung pong alcohol-based sanitizer is not ideal or not recommended for spore-forming bacteria. O, sino po yung spore-forming bacteria na yan? Dalawa lang naman, no? Dalawa lang naman ang ating spore-forming bacteria. Sino? Si Bacillus at saka sino? Si Bacillus species at saka si Clostridium. Okay? Bacillus and Clostridium, sila lang naman yung ating spore-forming. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing my ano pala, may whiteboard. Yan. Ang ating spore-forming bacteria ay si Bacillus at si Clostridium. So please take note of that. No? Hindi po recommended ang alcohol-based sanitizers kapag ikaw ay nagwo-work sa bacteriology section. Okay? So, this is what I've told you a while ago. Using antibacterial soap or detergent soap when your hands is visibly soiled with dirt, after eating, and after using comfort rooms or restrooms. So, this is your CDC guideline for hand hygiene when to apply alcohol-based sanitizer. May biologic waste disposal. Remember, all biologic waste product must be placed in appropriate containers labeled with biohazard symbol. But it is only urine. No? Si urine lang sa lahat ng body fluid ang pwede mong i-discard saan? Sa sink. The rest, dapat sa biologic hazards. So, pwede mo siyang tapon sa sink, but make sure you're going to flush it with water. No? The sink must be flushed with water after specimen are discarded. And of course, sodium hypochlorite. Okay? So, sodium hypochlorite. Eh, sir, pag po tinapon yung urine sa sink, saan po itatapon yung ating specimen container? Siyempre, sa biologic hazard waste. No? Sa yellow bag or sa infectious waste. Okay, so remember, 1 is to 10 dilution of sodium hypochlorite is prepared by adding 1 part of sodium hypochlorite and 9 parts of water. Tandaan mo, it can only last for 30 days if it is stored well against from light. I repeat, the 1 is to 10 sodium hypochlorite solution can only stand for 30 days assuming that it is stored well, no, without direct exposure sa light. The sharp hazards, so this includes your needle, lancet, and broken gas wires. Remember, you're going to dispose your sharps in a puncture-resistant container. Alam ko, nasabi ko na to sa inyo, pero ulitin lang ulit natin, no? Na yung dapat pagtapunan ng mga sharp hazards ay yung kulay red na hazard or sharps container. That is a puncture-proof, no? That is a puncture-proof. At kung napapansin nyo dito sa Pilipinas, yellow sila. Bakit yellow? Because of the manufacturer na lang kasi kaya yellow akala nila infectious. Pero dapat kapag red, that is for your sharp hazards. Let's take note of that. Red is for sharps hazard. And chemical hazard, so chemical spill exposure, chemical handling, chemical hygiene plan, chemical labeling, and material safety data sheet. So mahalaga yan kapag ang pinag-uusapan natin is chemical hazard. So ano po yung gagawin kapag nagkaroon ka ng accidental spill ng chemical? Flush it with water for at least 15 minutes and then ask medical attention. Ngayon, halimbawa acid ang natapon sa iyo and you know that acid plus base will neutralize the reaction, pero sa pagkakataong ito, huwag kang masyadong magmatalino kasi kung yun ang gagawin mo, pinahirapan mo lang ang sarili mo at lalo mo lang palalalain ang kondisyon. Never neutralize the chemical that come in contact with the skin. Natapunan ka ng hydrochloric acid, which is a strong acid, ang ginawa mo, patalino ka kasi, at favorite mo ang analytical chemistry, at alam mo neutralization reaction ng acid at base, nilagyan mo ng sodium hydroxide, which is also a strong base. At doon po natapos ang kwento ng buhay mo kapag ginawa mo yan. Okay, remember, never neutralize chemical that comes with the skin contact. In acid preparation, remember that you are always adding acid to water. Remember that you are going to add acid sa water. Okay? Tandaan mo, nauna ang A sa W. Why? To avoid sudden splashing. Na para kung mag-splash man, ang mag-splash sa'yo, water, hindi acid. Okay? An explosion can occur if water is added to acid. The reason why, you need to add acid to water. And I know naman that you are aware of that. Just a review. Okay, what is this one? This is the NFPA symbol. No? The National Fire Protection Association symbol. At ito po ay nahahati sa apat na quadrant. No, the red quadrant, the yellow quadrant, the white quadrant, and the blue quadrant. And what is the purpose of each quadrant? At ano po yung meaning ng bawat kulay na yan? Yellow is for reactivity hazard. White is for specific hazard. Blue is for health hazard. And red is for flammability hazard or fire hazard. Okay. So again, yellow ay reactivity. At bawat dyan, may leveling din tayo dyan. Kapag 0, it means stable. Kapag 1, unstable. Kapag 2, violent chemical change. Kapag 3, that is shock and heat. Okay? Kapag 4, may deteriorate. Next, kapag white, that is specific hazard. Is it a oxidizer? Is it an acid? Is it an alkaline? Is it a corrosive? Use no water, or it can be a source of radiation. So let's say for example, this one W na mayroong line, it means use no water. Kapag blue, yung blue quadrant naman natin, it pertains to health hazard. Normal material, slightly hazardous, extremely danger, or deadly. Okay? And that will be uh, discussed further. Next, kapag fire, it will burn above 20 degree Fahrenheit, below 20 degree Fahrenheit, and so on and so forth. Okay, example natin. Let's have here an example. By the way, before that pala, we have here the degree of hazard muna. Meron po tayong dalawang references for degree of hazard. Isa si kay Turgeon at isa kay Strassenger. Ang sabi ni Turgeon sa degree of hazard, health hazard, no SMS X. Kapag si Turgeon broken-hearted siya, kasi wala daw text ang X niya. No SMS X. No, zero, minimal hazard. S, 1, slight hazard. 2, M, moderate hazard. 3, S, serious hazard. 4, extreme hazard. EX. Next, according to Strassenger naman, si Strassenger, kung si Turgeon is a broken-hearted one, si Strassenger yung frustrated singer. I am saying this for you to remember. Strassenger sounds like singer, umulan, no shed, walang masisilungan. Okay? No, normal hazard, 0. 1, slightly hazardous. 2, hazardous. 3, extreme danger. 4, deadly. So, ano yung mahalaga ditong tandaan? Mahalaga ditong tandaan, no? Yung 3 ay magkaiba sila. Yung 3, kay Strassenger, extreme hazard na yon. Pero kay Turgeon, yung 3, serious. Ang 4, ang extreme hazard. So, tandaan mo, kapag nakita mo na merong deadly sa classification, that is Strassenger, no shed. Kapag nakita mo na merong serious, that's number 3 for torsion. Okay? So, tingnan nga natin. Recall. This was asked in our board exam, February 2017 board exam. Ang tanong, 3 in the health hazard pertains to. 3 in the health hazard pertains to A, extreme hazard, B, serious hazard, C, no hazard, D, moderate hazard. So, tandaan mo, meron kang dalawang references. Sa si Turgeon, isa si Strassenger. Ang sabi ni Turgeon, no SMX. 3, serious. Si Strassenger, no shed. 3, hazardous. Having said that the question is, 3 in the health hazard pertains to, then your answer should be serious. Okay? Kasi po, sabi ni Sturgeon, ang serious 3. Ang extreme ay 4. May extreme po ba dito? Meron. May serious din. So, ibig sabihin, ang ginamit ng mga Board of Examiner dito, ang reference nila dito ay si Sturgeon. Kasi yung extreme ay 4. Yung serious ay 2. Okay? Chemical hygiene plan, that's appropriate work practices, ano ba yung dapat mong ginagawa kapag magha-handle ng mga chemicals. No? The SOP, Standard Operating Procedures in Handling Chemicals. Okay, so we have here the OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Ano po ang sabi nila? Yung chemical labeling, dapat sinusunod. The chemical should contain, is it a poisonous? Is it a corrosive? Flammable po ba siya? Explosive po ba siya? Teratogenic po ba siya? Or carcinogenic? The label of the chemical should contain the following. Yan. Applying the NFPA symbol. Ang sabi dito, ang flammability, ang reactivity natin 2. Ang ating specific hazard W. Health hazard 3. Ang ating fire hazard or flammability ay 0. So, alamin natin kung ano to. So, 2 in a yellow quadrant is violent chemical change. W with a line is use no water. 3 is extreme danger. And 0 in the red quadrant pertains will not burn. Okay? So that is your sulfuric acid. So take note that this label should be present in the container of your, or in the label of your sulfuric acid. Okay? What is the importance of labeling? Now, can you differentiate where is water and where is acid? Di ba hindi? No? We don't know where is acid, where is base, assuming na ang isa dyan ay acid, ang isa dyan ay water. The reason why it is important ang labeling, most especially in specimen collection. The reason why if someone will submit a specimen without label, then you have to reject it. You should not accept it, because if you accept it without the label, then the responsibility will be under your name. If it has no label, reject it. Walang masamang mag-reject kasi importante yun sa laboratory. Kapag walang label, don't accept it. Okay? So that is the importance of labeling. Okay, and we also have your material safety data sheets, which includes the physical and chemical characteristics, fire and explosion potential, reactivity potential, heart hazard and chemical emergency first aid procedures, no methods for safe handling and disposal, primary routes of entry, exposure limits, and carcinogenic potential. Kaya mahalaga po yung MSDS. Kaya kapag may bago kayong binubuksan na mga reagent or gamit, laging sinasabi, keep the MSDS. Secure the MSDS. Yan ang example ng MSDS. Okay? So radioactive hazard, using of radioactive isotopes. Yun pong ating mga radioactive dye. No? Yun yung mga common radioactive hazard. However, hindi naman ganun ka taas ng exposure ng radioactive hazard sa clinical laboratory. Ang electrical hazards, alam niyo naman yan, do not operate when your hands are wet. Okay? Ngayon, meron pong tanong, ano yung dapat mong gawin kapag meron kang nakita yung isa mong katrabaho na kuryente? Abay, kapag nakuryente ang katrabaho mo, ang una mong gawin ay pati panoorin mo kung siya ikaaway mo? No, it shouldn't be like that. Ano yung mga dapat mong gawin kapag ikaw ay nakakita ng someone who is experiencing electrical injury? Turn off the breaker, unplug the equipment, and move the patient or the person using a non-conductive glass or wooden object. Ay baka naman ang gamitin mo bakal, di parehas kayo dun na nagkamaroon ng shock. So remember that metal is a good conductor of heat and electricity. So again, turn off the breaker, unplug. Sir, hawakan ko pa ba doon? Hindi, hilahin mo na lang yung cordon, yung cord. And then, let that person move, help the person to move using a conductive glass rod. I recall, tandaan, siguro napapansin nyo na din ito. Ano ba yung purpose nung pangatlong plug? Prong, I'm sorry, doon sa plug. That is the earth or ground. Tinatanong po yan sa board exam sa clinical microscopy. Para saan daw yung pangatlong uh, uh, plug na yan? That is for earth and ground. Neutral. Yung isa, yung light. Yung nasa gitna na pangatlo, ground or earth. Yung iba ang ginagawa dyan, inaalis. Pero hindi po siya dapat nire-remove. Okay? Fire hazards, flammable chemicals should be stored in safety cabinet. Explosion-proof refrigerators in a remote area. The person with burning clothes should be wrapped with a blanket to smoother the flame or umikot. No? Doon pa mag-ikot-ikot. Kaya yung blanket dapat basa. Yan. Huwag kang tatakbo kapag nasusunog ka kasi pag tumatakbo ka mayroong oxygen, mas lalo lang magkakaroon ng apoy. So roll on the floor, magpakaikot-ikot ka para mabatay po yung apoy. Now, what to do in case of fire? Siyempre, FB Live mo, usong-uso eh. O, as of the moment, susunog, ganito, FB Live. No. O kaya naman, dapat mag-inhale, exhale ka. Or, panoorin mo na lang siya. Or, picturean mo. Okay? But, for a moral consideration, what to do in case of fire? Okay, meron po tayong tinatawag na RACE. And RACE stands for rescue someone, alarm someone, contain the fire, extinguish, or evacuate. Okay? Remember, this is the thing that you need to do if in case there is a fire. Now, how to operate fire extinguisher? Yung pong mnemonic na pass. Pull the pin, aim the nozzle, squeeze the lever, and sweep side by side. These are the types of fire and the fire extinguisher. Okay? So, physical hazards, running in the room and hallway, wet floors, bend knees when lifting heavy object. Huwag yung nakatungo ka lang. Bend your knees when lifting an heavy object. No, para merong force, meron kang lakas. Keep long hair pulled back. Kaya po pala sir pinagboboknay. Kaya po pala hairnet. Yes. Because that's a physical hazard. Avoid dangling earrings, yung malalaki dyan. No? Hindi po yan dapat sinusuot. Okay? So, that is the end of our discussion about safety and quality assessment. I hope that you were able to learn and enjoy our first discussion about safety. Again, about quality assessment, please read it on your book. And we're going to have a deep discussion about quality assessment in our clinical chemistry course. Okay, I hope that uh, you will watch this again for you to review our topic. Okay, once again, thank you and stay safe everyone.